are listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Greetings, my name is Silas Rose, and you're tuned into Awake in Relationship. So we're living in strange times, and it's nothing like a pandemic to make one yearn for the beloved. And regardless of whether you're single or in a partner long-term relationship, chances are the lover archetype is showing up in your life in surprising ways. So what is the lover archetype? And how do we work with this transformational energy as a force of healing for ourselves and our world? How do we work with the shadow aspect of the lover? These are some of the questions I asked my guest, Indrus Piche, a transpersonal therapist, couples counselor, and sacred sexuality teacher living in Victoria, BC. So please join us in this conversation about the lover in dangerous times. Good morning, Indrus.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today, Silas.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, it seems kind of timely, that's for sure. You know, we are, as of this recording, kind of, I think about 14 or 15 days into a global pandemic.
Indeed.
So it's kind of strange times. And the social distancing mantra is everywhere. So I'm just kind of wondering how you're kind of dealing with this kind of radical change in our life.
Well, personally, I feel more hopeful in a way and more grounded than I might expect. I have the luxury of not having any loved ones ill, and I'm very grateful for that. But I do share that, of course, it's really challenging, and I can understand the anxiety and the fear that's coming up. But I also think there's enormous potential here to look at the way we live, a whole relationship with each other and with nature. It's a time I know with my clients, a lot of people are really reflecting deeply about who they are and how they want to live their lives. A lot about family is coming up. So I think it's a time to really, we're being taught to stay present. We have each and every day. We don't really know the journey we're going to take with it. So I'm glad to be part of this experience. And I really want to learn what I can from it and support others in learning what we may want to learn from it.
Yeah, I very much share that kind of hopeful vision that we are definitely in transformational times, and this is the start of something, very big, and hopefully is going to point us in the right direction. So, I'm really curious for those that don't know about transpersonal work. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that approach to psychological work and what kind of got you interested?
Yes. Transpersonal psychology, as I share it with my clients, has a deep root in Jungian and what we call positive psychology. So it very much is inclusive of one's inner world. So what I get very curious about is, how is the inner world reflected out in the outer world? Are they in alignment? That's a theme that comes up a lot, including in couples work. Where do they share kind of an inner journey and their joint imaginations, as well as what's happening for them in their outer lives? It also includes what sometimes is termed spiritual emergencies. And this is an aspect of this work that came out of things like near-death experiences, people having spiritual experiences like spontaneous Kundalini openings, journeys with psychedelics, and then the integration of experiences beyond what we think of as normal or everyday experiences. So that's also an aspect that at times I work with.
Is there any kind of crossover with Jungian thought?
There's a lot of grounding in Jungian thought. So in some ways, Jung was the first person to talk about in psychology that people's, I'll use the word soul, but I'm not using it in any sort of religious connotation. But the things that are most important, the wonder, the awe, that those things are really important when you're looking at people's psyches. And of course, things like dream work. For transpersonal psychologists, dream work seen as the unconscious trying to give us messages to work with in our conscious life. So that's very much Jungian thought. And so there's a lot of respect and learning. And what's interesting now in this day, I'm very curious, and I like to look at where some of the concepts of Jungian that came out of his time and place don't really relate for me anymore as a therapist working. Would you like a small example?
Yeah,
or
please.
We move on. Well, one of the ideas that Carl Jung offered us was the idea of anima and animus, this masculine and feminine force energies. And one of his ideas was around that the feminine would explore and maybe develop her masculine at midlife forward. And that for men, maybe explore emotions and what we would think of or term as feminine energies at midlife. And what I find in my practice and even observation of other women I know, women are running a lot of masculine energy throughout their life. And at midlife, often what I'm finding is a lot of women actually reclaiming their feminine or attempting to. So it's a different, there's something that's still part of Jungian concept, but I think being reworked in our day and age to make it more relevant.
Yeah, well, I think there's, and we're going to be talking about this later, in terms of the kind of larger kind of cultural movements that are happening right now, and essentially kind of rebalancing in our world, in terms of sexual dynamics, but obviously with the pandemic in terms of how we relate with each other in the world. And that sounds like a little bit of a throwdown with the Jungian side. And I've got a Jungian friend I want to bring on the show, so I'm going to follow up on that with him and get his perspective.
That'd be fascinating. I can't wait to hear it.
So the topic of today's discussion is about the lover archetype in dangerous times. And we are living in, I wouldn't call them dangerous, but I would call them more uncertain times. And, this lover archetype was really kind of popularized, particularly through the men's movement. There's a seminal book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore, who I think was a Jungian.
Yes.
And Douglas Gillette. And so, it's usually the lover is kind of associated with the masculine, but of course, men and women have both masculine and feminine energies. And I'm just kind of wondering, one, what is your understanding of this archetype and how it might kind of show up differently for men and women?
Good question. So I am familiar with Moore and Gillette's work. It's an old classic. And I'll talk first about how I know the lover and how I observe it in others. And I think it's important to mention here, Silas, that I don't think we need to put a box around this for the individual.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's more important is that people get curious about where their own lover, their unique lover, is alive and well, and where it's dormant, unexpressed, even been repressed. I think that that's a very important journey for people, because I think the archetype of the lover is way more important outside sexuality than we often even give ourselves time to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's a cultural force, yeah.
It is a cultural force. So some of the things that I play with and understand as the lover in myself and how I've seen it in others is that basic idea that the lover archetype within us actually loves life. It wants life to be lived to the fullest, and it accepts and knows that life isn't all pleasure, that it can be hard, challenging, but it's still worth engaging, and it's still worth trying to have our life force energy fully engaged with our own lives. That's, to me, one of the fundamental bases of this. And for me, archetypal forces are actual energies that are at work both collectively and personally in our culture. The lover also, for me, really honors and respects beauty and nature and is willing to defend its place in the world, that it has a right to exist, that it's not just things like green space that maybe we could make more money if we did something else with.
So there's a fierce quality to it.
It can. This is where in Moore and Gillette's work, one of the archetypal, and they named it in the masculine as the warrior. So this is where this, you can see it in the environmental movement very often. And what's really important, and Gillette and Moore talked about this, they made the point that the lover archetype will often be a foundational and a supportive piece of many other archetypal energies. So in the warrior, it understands sometimes that there has to be a battle, but it should be aligned with justice and what's right for the collective, not personal gain. So the lover force, or the lover energy, would temper the warrior energy never to be cruel or never to have to use its force more than it's necessary or needed. So this is the way the lover kind of underpins a lot of other archetypes. So in this way, yes, it might be asked to defend beauty, nature, which is an enormous topic in our world today. It's one of the main themes. What are we going to do about climate change? What are we going to do about actually taking care of the great mother? This is where the lover archetype has to come forward and find collectively new value and a new way of expressing itself that isn't necessarily in the personal. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say that, I think that the lover is always kind of present in our world, but, most often in kind of in the shadow form.
Yes.
And in many ways, that kind of generative power has been kind of co-opted by market forces to kind of sell us stuff that we don't need.
Mm-hmm. And images that usually aren't useful for the vast majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And in this time of kind of an epidemic of loneliness, it's sort of there is this kind of real hunger for connection, for pleasure, for comfort that many, especially now, many of us are trying to kind of realize through our screens, through Zoom calls and being in social isolation and stuff during the pandemic. And I just wonder if we could talk about that for a minute, because it really is this kind of amplification of something that's been happening for a while in our culture, whereas the hunger is growing, but our ability to kind of satiate that hunger, through real relationships, it seems like it's getting harder.
Mm-hmm. And I think it is for some people. And I think we have to create a lot more opportunity for people to connect the sort of depth that they want to be connecting to others with. There is a longing, I think, for intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
It helps make us more vulnerable. And one of the ways we learn about how to be more loving is the pathway of vulnerability. It actually is our greatest strength, I think, as humans, when it's used well. So maybe creating more opportunity. There is so much shadow in this whole area. I can understand why people really have difficulty finding their way towards connection, belonging with others. Even the idea of sexuality, which is our creation energy, our life force energy, the whole thing about being a lover, we don't make space or room to talk about it in any sort of normal way in our society.
Yeah, and it tends to be kind of fetishized,
we all know about the big shadow pieces, how the abuse, the actual violence that's associated with it. But on a more subtle level, shadow can be really seen and has over, I think, generations become things like just not knowing or having any vehicles to talk about it and explore things like desire. What do we find attractive? How do we relate to others if we're not sexual with someone else?
Let's kind of zero in on the intimacy part or intimate relationships, and I'm just kind of wondering, how the shadow of the lover kind of undermines those, our intimate relationships.
Well, I would say, first of all, very often people don't actually know themselves that well as a lover. We have to connect with our own life force energy, our own sexuality, before we can really become in union with another. So in relationships, very often you have two people who honestly haven't had a lot of conversation about what they want, what brings pleasure. There's a shadow aspect that certainly needs to be talked about more in the form of, and I'm not against pornography, but what's happening at the moment, it's one of the fastest growing addictions in our culture. And very often the wiring is towards something on a screen that isn't a real person. It gets very confusing. For some people, they can't then be aroused or actually connect connect deeply or have intimacy with a real life person. There's a lot of different shadow pieces we really need to address and work on, but I think it's all doable, and I think it's work that's worth doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've spent a good chunk of your professional life kind of, really niching into the whole sacred sexuality piece of relationship. And, sex tends to be kind of a real quagmire of both enlightened and neurotic kind of emotions and feelings. And I'm kind of wondering how, sacred sexuality, perhaps Tantra might approach desire in an authentic way.
Yes, and my exploration, actually, some of my first experiences and probably what led me into this area of interest and exploration for a lot of my life was having some experiences in nature when I was a child, and many years later realizing they were probably Kundalini openings.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of basic tenets when you start exploring the world of what we now call sacred sexuality, and you will find that it means very different things to different people and different teachers. So very important that you find your own way with it, and you have your own sense of boundaries and what you want for yourself in the way that you want to explore it. I would say that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the basic tenets are things like we're always making love. That this idea that we start making love when we get in bed together is actually counterproductive, that it doesn't allow for one of the other pieces of the lover that I was going to mention, which is the high value of play.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of the idea that we go on an adventure. So in sacred sexuality traditions, you really try to get rid of the goal. It isn't this, okay, well, if we do this and we do that, then maybe you'll have an orgasm, maybe I'll have an orgasm. There isn't really that high value placed on any kind of penetration.
Mm-hmm.
You may decide that may be part of it, but it gives you a much bigger sort of playground to play in a way. There's a high emphasis on, and this is a place that I am well past menopause and have no natural estrogen running. The whole idea of arousal and desire gets very interesting in your 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to play with it and explore.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the places that you can really play with is the arousal of all your senses. And in sacred sexuality traditions, the idea is that when we have a root chakra experience, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, but they're actually a very limited experience for what we might experience. So in these traditions, you use your root chakra energy and with breath and movement and sound, it travels and can be released to go through your body and eventually, join with heart, which is very important. If we had a world where our sexual energy was in union with our heart energy, we would probably have a different world. And then the potential, and this is some of the experiences that I've enjoyed, but again, good not to get attached to them. They come by grace, where the energy can travel up the body. And I think what happens is, like other altered experiences or mystical states, you have activation of the pineal gland from the in union with your sexual energy. But I can say if that never happened, or that to not have it as a goal.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just come back to the idea that there's a lot of play and a lot of exploration and a lot of information that we're never given, that we have no idea about how to explore them. And that could be a place that we could really offer something different for the generations to come that would be so much more healthy and would do so much about letting the shadow sort of disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's drill into that a little bit. So I'm wondering for the listener, that might be partnered at this time, and we'll talk about the single after. But
yeah,
what would be a good sort of first step into that kind of exploration?
Well, I would say sit down and talk to each other first.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really starting with basics because for the years I've worked with couples, and I'm now in the 10,000 hour mark.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing about what people in intimate relationships don't often talk about. So making room, if you haven't already done it, what do you know about yourself as a lover? Where are your fears? Where is there shame still left? How do you want to be desired by another? How do you want to be flirted with? They're high forms of foreplay.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you've had some of those conversations, what do you want to learn about? There are books now. There are seminars all over the world really now. What do you want to experience together and play with together that you haven't done before?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the sort of ways that the couples can work with it. And beginning ways. And if you're non-partnered, first of all, remember we are always in relationship with ourselves. And that isn't, I know it's hard, and I know a lot of people have such longing and true desire to be in relationship with another. But I also want to say that I've spent half of my adult life in relationship with another and half in relationship with primarily myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of value in both. So the idea of self-pleasuring can be taken to heights that maybe a lot of people haven't explored. You really get to work with your own energy that way. I think cultivating the sensuality aspect of yourself in the ways that the lover is expressed and not expressed in yourself personally. It also acts as an attraction thing to others. Mm-hmm. You can feel it. You can see it in people who have their own life force energy running. And it's a form of confidence and ease. It's like I'm comfortable in my own body. Mm-hmm. I'm comfortable with who I am. And I also think that we have to get more creative about sharing with other people, either in couples and non-partnered. And I would like to actually see more of a mix of those groups, where people who are partnered also have discussion groups, talks, and more things in the community. And you're doing your part, Silas, just by opening up these topics to things like podcasts. It'd be interesting if people picked up on this and took some of these ideas and then formed a salon or a group. And I'd go further to say, if you have people who you really feel safe and comfortable with, things like even giving each other massages, and have a conversation about what kind of massage you want, whether or not there's more sexual touch or not, and just being clear. But the idea of being touched when you're not being touched often, It's really important, and there's so much healing when we normalize and we're clear and have agreements and people can find ways to be touched. That it's really important for everybody's well-being.
The role of lover in society at this moment, it's a very uncertain time. Has, even before the pandemic, there's big kind of cultural movements around climate change and economic and social justice. And it just sort of feels like we are moving towards some sort of big change. And historically, the lover, be it the Renaissance or the hippie generation, has played a really important role, that kind of liberalization. What do you see the role of the lover at this time, in this kind of particular time, is? And I'm also really curious, how do kind of temper or enhance the role of the lover, especially in a Me Too era?
Okay, I'll speak a little bit first to where we might be able to take this that could be useful both on personal levels and the collective levels. What if we let the lover energy emerge more? What if we valued it more? I think one of the things that I didn't mention in the beginning about a quality that's important, I think, in the lover, and maybe more so right now than in other times, is the idea that the lover, and this is part of the sacred sexuality tradition, we don't make love through doing. This whole thing is in a state of being. We lift ourselves out of the everyday doing, the busyness, that sort of thing, and enter into that state that in mindfulness traditions and very, mindful's like an everyday word now, which it wasn't 20 years ago, when very much part of the early practice of transpersonal psychology, depth psychology, this idea of mindfulness, right? So the lover helps us learn how to transition between doing and being, and knows that when we spend time in a state of being, we actually do things better. We have more of a depth, a reflection. This is where some of the indigenous people are great teachers. They've learned about being in nature. Watching other aspects of life and learning from it. So part of what we would have to do is actually connect to that being state to let the lover emerge now. And the lover energy, I think, is also important that we begin to really let, I'll call it sex positive, really start. What if we started giving children information that was actually useful? What if we started actually not being afraid of this energy? It's interesting when you're talking about the masculine and feminine earlier, the archetypes are 4 in both. In, queen, mother, wise woman, lover, the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. The only commonality is the word lover, and it's non-gendered. So we can actually cultivate this as an energy of balance, of valuing things other than money and accomplishment. It would be a form of sexual revolution that we wouldn't necessarily have to go to radical extremes, to make itself seen and known and valued, I think we could do it in a way that was very healthy. That would really help us create some of the solutions for the issues that need to be addressed. So it's part of, for the rest of my time on Earth, to create as much opportunity as possible for people to actually get comfortable and to be able to talk more normally about the areas of the lover, of sensuality, of sexuality. I think it's coming, Silas.
Well, it's already happening in terms of, talking about consent and how we negotiate our needs in relationship.
Yeah, Betty Martin's beautiful work.
Yeah.
The Wheel of Consent.
Exactly. And that, just slowing down. That seems to be the message behind the pandemic, but also in terms of how we approach our needs and wants in relationship is, really amping up the mindfulness and really tuning into our sense of sensuality and the subtleties of that.
And I think everyone that's conscious and wants something better for themselves and the world in terms of sexuality are happy that the Me Too movement exists in naming things. And I'm going to put myself out on a limb here, and I'm willing to fall off the branch. It's one of the gifts of aging. You can just say what you think more. I don't like the whole punishment aspect of it. I don't think it's serving us. I don't think men are going to learn things by being put in jail. I think they're places of unlearning and unconsciousness because we don't do them well. So I would offer a different vision that people who have had a history or part of what they land up doing is using abuse and power in the realms of sexuality, that they're actually brought into a place of relearning and understanding. Even videos of people who have had horrific experiences under circumstances where they had to be exposed and give a chance for empathy and compassion and relearning to actually take place. So although I'm very happy that the Me Too movement is happening, I'm not sure that I'm happy with some of the outcomes of it.
Well, it seems like there is a kind of subtler conversation that's happening right now in terms of distinguishing between, chronic bad behavior and good men that do bad things and are somewhat, hopefully, kind of being accountable for that.
Yes, and it's not just men. I do, as a woman, want to state that. And the other thing I would say, and this also is going out on a limb and not very popular right now, part of what I'm writing about and talking about with other people who identify as women, and we have used the terms masculine, feminine, and men and women in this podcast, and I just want to absolutely acknowledge that a lot of people don't identify, and I respect and honor and applaud that. And that's also coming out in the open, because I think it's always been there historically. And just an honoring of that and acknowledgement of it. But I also think those of us that have been in a woman's position or identify as women, we have to do a much better job at teaching younger women how to say yes, how to say no, how to listen to their bodies, how to be clear what kind of situations they might not want to find themselves in, and the whole idea of how to empower people so that they're very, very clear. And that's not to blame or shame or in any way indicate that some people are not actually just victimized. They clearly are.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think we have a lot of work to do around this.
Mm-hmm.
All of us.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we'll be having more conversations about that on Awakened Relationship for sure. Thank you. So, people want to connect with your work or you. How can they be in touch?
The simplest way is Indrus, INDRUS, Indrus@indrus.com, my email address. And if they're interested in getting on my mailing list, as you mentioned, I offer, right now I'm doing 4 elements, and that's partners, both same-sex and men and women partners, groups 4 times a year, air, earth, fire, and water, and we explore different kinds of intimacies. I also do a day for people who identify as women, beauty, blessings, and bliss. We were going to do it on solstice, but because of the world situation and health issue, we had to cancel, but I'll be offering that again. And then I also work with another couple, Robert and Judith Gass, and we teach both at Hollyhock and at a beautiful retreat center in Mexico. And anybody who wants to learn more about any of those offerings could contact me, and I would be happy to provide them with all the information they need.
Well, again, Indrus, thank you, and stay healthy, stay well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much, and you also, Silas. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Indrus. I know I did. So head on over to wickedrelationship.com and check out the show notes. You can also sign up for the newsletter and send me a message if you have any feedback. I'm always on the lookout for new guests and ideas, so your feedback is really helpful. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate a review on iTunes. So, till next time, stay connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device, or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.